Alongside the entrance lock to Bristol's harbour lies an important part of the city's industrial heritage, Brunel's 1849 wrought iron swivel bridge. It's been awarded Grade 2 star listing as a historic structure. Volunteer engineers from the Avon Industrial Buildings Trust are restoring it. The bridge rotated on 4 27-inch diameter cast iron wheels fixed in a circular pit. When restorers examined the northwest wheel, they found that over 100 years of wear and water had taken their toll, and it was beyond repair. A new cast wheel was needed. The listed status means that any replacement wheel has to be made in the style of the Victorian original. Restorers turned to the Boro Foundry in Stourbridge, one of the few foundries able to combine traditional techniques with modern metals on a job of this size. The casting process for the wheel begins with a wooden pattern, produced by craftsmen from restoration engineers' drawings, but made 1% oversized to allow for contraction during the casting process. It's painted in traditional pattern maker's red. The pattern is placed on a smooth surface, and the lower half of the mould is made by carefully packing virgin moulding sand around it in a moulding box. The moulding sand is made from a fine, clean sand mixed with a hardening agent. More sand now, black recycled moulding sand. The mould has to be thick enough to support the enormous weight of the molten metal without any distortion or cracking. After an hour, the sand has hardened enough, and the mould and pattern are turned, ready to repeat the process and form the upper part of the mould, with the pattern sandwiched between the two at this stage. Great skill and care are needed to place cylinders of hardened moulding sand onto the pattern in order to form reservoirs of hot metal during the casting process.
You know, why can't we leave it like this? This material is exothermic. Yeah, now we're going to have some engagement to the top. Look at this.
These reservoirs store molten metal to ensure there's an adequate supply of metal for the casting as it cools and contracts. This upper part of the mould is made in the same way as the lower part, but includes a funnel-shaped feeder point into which the molten iron will be poured. Once the upper mould has hardened, the two parts are separated. The wooden pattern is loosened by wrapping, then lifted out of the mould and set aside for possible future use. The two halves of the mould are then checked and put together again, ready for casting. This wheel is to be cast using spheroidal graphite iron, a more ductile metal than the original plain grey iron available to Brunel. The metal is heated to around 1400 degrees Celsius, and the pouring takes just a matter of minutes. It looks easy, but again it's a skilled process. The metal takes a day or so to cool enough to allow the mould to be opened and the casting to be released. The still smoking hot wheel is given a rough clean, left to cool further for an hour, and then it's off for a spin in the shot blaster. Here the casting is placed on a heavy-duty turntable and in a closed chamber, rotated for several minutes in a high-speed stream of steel shot. This gets rid of the last vestiges of sand and other residues, and when it leaves the shot blaster, the casting is ready for fettling. That's the removal of the runners and risers, the surplus parts of the casting process. These will be cut off with an angle grinder to make the wheel ready for final machining to its design dimensions. After addition of a new bearing shaft machined to fit the original Victorian bearings, the whole assembly weighs in at around 300 kilograms and is ready for delivery to Bristol. A few days later, the freshly painted wheel is delivered to the bridge, and the restoration engineers are faced with the daunting task of manoeuvring it across what remains of the deck of the bridge. At a third of a ton, the assembly is far too heavy to lift manually into what is really a very awkward position, so some fairly basic engineering techniques are used to move the wheel across the deck. Then it's over to a chain hoist to drop it gently into position in the wheel pit a few metres below.
Keep still now. That's it, take the frame out.
Are we greasing these before we lower it down?
Once the assembly is positioned over the original supports, it's a relatively simple job to lower it into its bearings.
Moment of truth, Bob.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, take the spring off.
We've lost a lot of paint, but it's in.
So let's try turning it, shall we? Just a minute, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, moment of truth, chaps. Let's see if it turns, shall we? Oh, there is a piece of dirt there.
Final tweak and the job is done. The worn Victorian wheel is to be a museum exhibit, and the new wheel just needs a refurbished bridge to rotate on it. But that's a £1 million story.